Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, legends, and welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Today, the shackles are off, and we're doing our first solo podcast. You're listening to your host, James Doumtsis, and I will be discussing a few tips and tactics around getting rut ready. And we're going to plan this and set this up for a bit of a checklist for you guys so you can run through, make sure that you guys are fully ready to go by the time April rolls around for the rut. Before we get into that, I just want to share story, a hunt that's very much on my mind at the moment, considering I finished it this morning, and that is one for a magnificent velvet buck. In the last 12 months moving to Armidale, I got some access that seems that the bucks just hang there all year, which is awesome for me, as in you can hunt them all year round. You're not pinned down to that sort of month or so when the rut is happening. So yeah, it seems like they're during velvet period, and they're also there. Seen a really good one in July as well last year. So just opens up the opportunities to hunt them, and yeah, have a bit of fun outside of the main rut period chasing these bucks. But this story starts back actually on the 5th of December 2024 when I went into this gully system. I'd found it when I first got access to the property, sort of off the beaten track. There's no roads or anything going into there. It's about 1.5 km long, not super steep gullies, but yeah, quite thick with sort of blackberries and the thick timber. And actually went there thinking, it was just before the rut, and I was like, this is going to be such a perfect spot for does. And to be honest, I was pretty wrong. Like every time I've been there, I've never really seen does, but I've always just thought it was this nice little secluded area. And roll around to the 5th of December last year, had been there a couple of times. Like I said, only really seen does, hadn't seen a buck in there ever. And was walking up the gully first thing in the morning and ended up stumbling onto and glassing up 4 bedded bucks. And I could see straight away that there was one really mature one in the group, compared to the other ones being sort of spikers and sort of second year heads, I guess. And so I tried to take some video through my phone, which didn't really work out, just to document him. But the big thing that stood out was his frame. Like he didn't really sort of go up like a V. He almost went out flat off his coronets. And then you could see it starting to go up into his palm, and he had this really boxy frame. And anyway, so roll around to the 22nd of January. Hadn't been able to make it back there due to work and obviously Christmas commitments and whatnot. Just hadn't been in the area to actually go and scout, so just had no idea. Had a couple of hours off in the afternoon after doing a job and thought I'd better go have a look for him. And considering I'd found a fair few bucks on this place, about probably 25 or 30, it is a large property and had covered a lot of country to find these little nooks and crannies where the bucks were hiding. But once you sort of found one, it sort of was a bit of a copy and paste job, and found a few bachelor mobs, which was awesome. But this guy from that date seemed to be the best and most matured, had the best potential of becoming a big buck that I dreamed about getting in velvet. And so yeah, went and straight away started walking up the gully system, and the wind, to be honest, was just one of these days where there wasn't much wind, and so it felt like it was blowing 5 directions. It was just up my ass. It was in front of me, across me, everywhere. And ended up just thinking, I'm going to climb this western facing slope. It seemed to be the predominant wind direction. But also just thought that these bucks are probably going to be bedded. It's a hot day, so I was thinking these bucks are probably going to be bedded down in the gully. And if I can find them, at least then hopefully I'm going to be above them. The west slope had all the thick timber and blackberries and stuff, so I thought that's going to be probably the best bet. And anyway, end up hiking up, get up high, and just slowly made my way up to about a third of the way up the hill, and I'm picking apart, and way off, actually found the buck that I was chasing, probably 600-700 meters away, bedded up in a fairly open clump. And he's got these, like, he's a mental buck, but he's just that light fawny color, which just meant that his white dots were just like electric. Like they just stood out so much. And ended up picking him up through like a clump of trees and everything like that, and started making my stalk in And where they were actually bedded, there was sort of a little finger gully that came off the main ridge between us. And so it's getting dark. Well, can't really, shooting light sort of stops at about 8:30 at the moment, and found him at about 7 o'clock. So had plenty of time. The biggest factor really was just the wind and just noise, because there was absolutely no wind. The grass is knee high. The blackberries are trying to grab at you, and just every single step was so just trying to take that into account and pick the best route in. So I took my boots and packs off and started moving in on this buck. He was with the same two bucks that the group of four now dropped down to two, like a little mental spike in another sort of 2.5-year-old head. All, I should say, he was like very much at the end of velvet. Like I even saw him sort of touching trees and stuff like that, which so just absolutely prime for the taking. And I start moving in, and I went down initially first thinking that I could pop up below them, but pretty quickly realised that with the blackberries, the gully, and not having cattle in that particular paddock, probably adding to the fact why they were there, the blackberries in this sort of finger or side gully were just way too thick. Like there was no way that I was going to be able to penetrate it, at least quietly enough to get into it, through the valley and up the other side to these bucks. So I ended up having to go quite high around the top of the gully, which then sort of put me into, and this is all quite slow. So by this time I've got to the top of the gully, it's probably 7:45. Like it'd taken quite a long time to almost walk around to the head of it. And by that stage, as you can imagine, the sun's sort of starting to drop. It's certainly not below the horizon, but it's getting close. And with that, you've got thermals to start taking into account. So I end up sort of going down the edge of the sort of side gully the whole time, just taking into account where these bucks were, because they were now on their feet and just milling around. Really, mainly not foraging on actual grass or anything like that. They were just smashing blackberries. And if I've learned anything in the last 24 hours, it is how good of an energy source and a food source those blackberries were. They're not only eating the berries themselves, but also eating just the leaves off them. Like they were just head in those bushes constantly, which made for really good cover, because obviously, if you've got big antlers sticking out the top of your head and your main face and everything is in a blackberry bush, then it obviously makes for a really good stalking situation. So I was hoping they were just going to stick around these certain blackberry bushes that were sort of on this open face. And as I'm sort of cutting down this side gully, they just decided to start walking off. And that was a bit of a pain, to be honest, because they were in like a really good stalking position, would have been able to make it into well within bow range quite easily of where they were. But as they started walking off, I started feeling and checking the wind, and the thermals at that stage were really taking into play and starting to suck down. So they were sort of walking down. They'd walked actually up to a fence line and were starting to walk down that from my left to my right. And I immediately sort of cut down back into that sort of little side finger gully and started cutting forward, trying to cut them off, knowing and predicting that they would walk down this fence line. And so they were just slowly walking down this fence line. And as I popped up from the little gully up onto the bench that the fence was running down, they were in this perfect spot and had a blackberry bush in between us and them, and started moving up to them, got to about 50 meters off them. And instead of them continuing walking from left to right, they then started, for some reason, whatever reason, only they know why, feeding back to my left. And I didn't really have any cover there. And so essentially what happened is I just got caught in no man's land and got spotted. And, the biggest buck, who was a proper giant, just started staring at me. And the old, say a small prayer and hope that you see him again. And anyway, they end up jumping the fence. They weren't really alarmed. They just jumped the fence and started sort of moseying off, walking and feeding. Like they weren't running. They weren't anything like that. They just sort of seen something that made them feel uncomfortable. Anyway, I was like, oh, stuff it. I'll follow them up, and actually thought I'll try and get a little sneaky video for you guys in terms of to put up on my social media and Instagram. And I noticed they dropped down into the other branch, the right branch now of this sort of Y gully at the head. And they crossed through the gully and were walking up the other side. And I was like, I can still do this. And by now it's probably 8:10. So I'm very much conscious of the wind, very much conscious of shooting light. I decided to get down into this tiny little gut, I guess, like it was only a small little divot, and just start belly crawling for the first about 50 meters as fast as I could, while they were just sort of walking up, just making sure I was well and truly below eyesight. And then once it sort of deepened out, could then get into sort of a hunched over walk and or hunched over position, I should say. I wasn't walking, I was actually sprinting up this hill as fast as I could, trying to get in front of them. We made it to the top of this gully, which was probably about 150 to 200 meters up, and that was the boundary fence. What happened was I could see them across this little gully, and I was on one side, they were on the other side, and then all of a sudden I just see them turn and come left and start walking straight towards me. And at that stage I was like, oh, my prayer has been answered. And it just proves to me time and time again, like I can't think of how many times this has happened where admittedly, you probably bust something up the first time, or you do something a bit silly, move too fast. But yeah, you just keep putting in the work and you get that second opportunity or second chance, and you get rewarded. Like just so many times, time and time again, you just get rewarded for effort. That 15 minutes from last light, and you're like, oh no, I'm going to run out of time. But you're like, no, I'm going to sprint up the hill at those running pigs or that croaking buck or roaring red. And I just can't think of how many times it's actually paid off for me. And time again, like this one, it's worked out. So I've run up the hill and got into position. And next thing I know, not probably 20, 30 seconds later, they popped up at about 45 meters out of this gully. And it never happens like this, but the big buck is first, walking straight towards me. Normally it's them at the end. And he came walking straight towards me, and he was walking on the game trail. I was only like 5 meters off the fence line. I'm kneeling down and I'm positioned. All around me, I had butcher birds and magpies going off in the trees above me. And so I'd arranged a bush at about 35 meters. Anyway, he was standing right next to that and was sitting there sort of a bit alarmed, looking around. He stopped and went broadside. And to be honest, I probably should have taken that opportunity, knowing the distance, having my pin set. But I thought he was going to walk in and keep coming into me on that game trail. And it was going to be a pot shot at 15 meters because I was just off the game trail in some really good cover. And with all the bird alarms, he ended up being really, I guess, sort of spooked or flustered, and he was sort of sitting there looking around, not really sure what to do. And after about 2 or 3 minutes of that, he sort of turned and went quartering away. And he sat like that for another 2 or 3 minutes until he calmed down and started feeding on a blackberry bush at the same angle, quartering away. And I just slowly sort of went from a kneeling position and put my one knee out to sort of raise above the blackberry bush that was in front of us. Felt super confident, drew back. Settled the pin, felt great, and let the arrow fly. And I heard this whack. Saw they all straight away, all three of the bucks just went absolutely crazy, went running down the hill. I'm jumping up and down like a little schoolgirl. And I ended up sitting there in the dark for about 40 minutes because I hadn't seen the actual arrow hit the buck. I just heard the sound, which, wasn't 100% sure on what that was. And it was obviously in the way that he'd run off was really stoked, and saw the buck sort of run about 100 meters and go into the thick timber. I couldn't see because I couldn't see. I saw the two smaller bucks, but couldn't see the bigger buck with them at the time. And ended up leaving at 40 minutes. Went back and grabbed the pack and boots, and then went back and started my search. And so I went to the site where I'd hit him, or thought I'd hit him, and started looking, and it became pretty apparent immediately, in my head at least. Other than the sound, I didn't really have much to go off. I didn't see where the arrow had flown because I was sort of shooting over that little blackberry bush that was my cover. Like I knew it was well and truly going to clear it just with the flight path. But obviously wasn't 100% sure in seeing the arrow flight. And spent what ended up being about 2 hours trying to find even a drop of blood. I ended up, the only thing that makes it hard is I couldn't see where the arrow would have gone into with a miss was this massive blackberry bush on like a downhill slope. And so I excavated the bush as best as I can and just couldn't find the arrow still now. But ended up spending about 2 hours last night trying to find him. Ended up getting back to my car after 11 o'clock and made a decision to sleep in my car and then come back or walk back up the gully in the morning and try and find him. Ended up spending another couple of hours this morning trying to find him and the arrow, and couldn't find a single drop of blood or him or the arrow. So I think with all the evidence, other than the sound and not being able to find my arrow, but it doesn't really surprise me in that country that I couldn't. Yeah, I'm pretty gutted to not 100% know that I missed him, but everything points to that, I guess, in the sense that I just don't understand that if I did hit him quartering away, the arrows most likely would have been in him, which means it would have been snapped, within a couple of meters of the shot. There should be at least some blood somewhere. Like, I searched high and low, like everywhere was perfectly fluorescent green, blackberry bushes, and especially at night, I actually find it sometimes easier to blood trail in that sort of environment because you're very concentrated where the light is, but also like red on electric green blackberry bushes or grass just stands out like no one's business. And just could not find a single drop. And so, as the devastation was, I guess, because it was probably one of the best bucks I've ever seen. So it'll be a bit late. You guys will see this probably on my Instagram story in the next couple of days. But I am very much still licking my wounds over that one. Just to do with the journey, I guess, in terms of finding him, knowing he was there. I didn't get to fully watch him grow out, but just testing the theory in terms of, that gully would be perfect. Found the buck, big mature buck, find him again, get in close, stuff the stalk, put in the effort, get that second chance, and then, just have it fall apart in the last moments was a bit devastating. But that is bow hunting. That's why we do it, for the highs and the lows. But hopefully I can get out in the next couple of weeks and find another velvet buck to help with the sorrows, or maybe one that's rubbing out. So stay tuned for that in future podcasts. With these hot summer conditions, managing your electrolytes to optimize performance has never been more important. With Atlas Wild's complete range, they have you covered. I use the Rise first thing in the morning in my camel pack, keep me caffeinated throughout the morning hunt and make sure I don't have any lows. In the afternoon, I switch it up to their Fusion, which has less caffeine, or a Regenerate, and these contain B vitamins and electrolytes. I'm doing this to pay it forward for my body. I'm fueling it and giving it everything it needs to recover overnight, ready to face the hills or whatever stands in my way the next day. We've teamed up with Atlas Wild to give you 10% off your next order by using code TWIN10. That's TWIN 10 numerically at checkout to get 10% off your next order. Let's dive into the main topic of the podcast, and that is getting you guys rut ready with a few tips and tactics mixed into that, but mainly just setting you guys up with a bit of a checklist. It's the end of January now, so we're still a couple of months out from the fallow and red rut, which is obviously probably arguably one of the biggest main events for our hunting here in the South Pacific, whether in New Zealand or whether in Australia. Everyone knows and talks about the rut. It is the time that most hunters are in the bush. It's an incredible time to be in the bush. And this is just a bit of a checklist to set you guys up so that it doesn't roll around to the 20th of March and you're thinking about all the things that we're about to tell you. So the first thing that we've got is, as the most important one and top tip really, is all around communication with not only your friends and family, but also around your work commitments. So getting time off work early is critical in the sense that, don't wait till the first week in March. Oh, hey boss, can I please take off a week, on the 10th of April or whatever. And, I imagine in some circumstances and services that, that's probably your peak time. Like I know with me, in terms of elk hunting, September used to be our busiest time at work. And so I used to pretty much every year before the year before, I would go to take that time off. And it's the same with the rut now. Like I've already told my partner that I'll be taking off a month for the rut. Yes, I'll be doing some work during that period, but already expressed to her quite early on the importance of the rut to me and being out in the Aussie bush at that time. So make sure you talk to your partners, but especially talk to work and make sure you've locked in that time that you can financially firstly take off, but also making sure there's no detriment to your family. So some dates that we like to work around, it does depend on where you are up and down the East Coast. We find that the higher densities of deer numbers mean that you have sort of a broader rut, I guess, and a longer time period to experience those awesome rut activities. But if I was to pick, just say a couple of day block or a week block for each species, then for me, for fallow deer, I'd be taking off about the 10th to the 14th. I've just find no matter where I have been hunting, whether it's, Tassie, talking to people down there, down in Victoria, now in New South Wales, obviously talking to guys in Southeast South Australia, it just seems to be that prime time. Certainly Southeast South Australia and in the Hunter Valley or New South Wales area, up in the high country in Victoria and stuff, they can go a little bit earlier or considerably earlier, like pushing into those late March dates, especially with trying to get bucks before there's a heap of does there and stuff like that. When they're touching up the scrapes, couldn't be a really good fun period. But yeah, talking about just that absolute frenzy of rutting activity for fallow deer, I would be looking at taking off time between the 10th and 14th. Now with reds, I find that they go a little bit earlier. So I generally try and target them between sort of the 5th to the 10th. Similar to the fallow deer, you can have really good success early, like pre-rut and late rut, just with different tactics and whatnot. And similarly with the fallow and reds, we'll be releasing some specific podcasts on targeting them pre, during, and post-rut for each species shortly. So stay tuned for that one. But yeah, for the reds, if you want that real, prime time rutting activity, then the 5th to the 12th is probably what I'd be looking for to lock in dates for reds. Another thing is obviously talking to friends and family around commitments. Like there is a lot of public holidays. We got Anzac Day, we got Easter weekend and holidays at that time. And so my family pretty much know that we don't rock up. Aiden, Dad and I, we don't go to Easter. They're all aware of that. They've been aware of that since we probably turned 18, to be honest. And everyone understands that we're obviously very committed to hunting. And that's something for you to obviously decide what you're going to do. Like a lot of families, like I'd say most families nowadays, go away for that Easter weekend and go camping somewhere, which I think is an incredible tradition, and would love to be a part of that potentially one day with my kids. But generally speaking, that Easter weekend also falls somewhere where I would like to be hunting and chasing fallow and reds. So it's a bit of a toss-up. It may not be something that you can accomplish every year, but it's just having a bit of a plan around those days and what time you are able to spend in the bush. But try and organise it early because as we talk about later in the next couple of tips, talking to your family and work and making sure everything's lined up there is going to be a huge plan or critical part to making sure that you've got that time off to capitalise during the rut. I actually asked my beautiful partner, Eden, who was disappointed she hadn't made it on the first 2 podcasts, so I had to flag her here, but I asked her what her suggestions were around, obviously we haven't got kids or anything, but just around, talking to your spouse or talking to your partner and loved ones, and around preparing for the rut, but also going on the rut. And she just had a couple of small tips. I guess the first one she said was making sure all your chores are done so you don't leave your partner or family in the lurch and make them pick up your shortfalls for not doing things around the house or not doing things with the kids. So making sure all your commitments are done before you shoot off the rut. A big one for her is, which she's expressed a couple of times, sticking to the dates when you say you're going, you make sure you come back. I obviously get a little bit excited, and if I can push it to the last minute and maybe add an extra day or 2 in, I will. So, I mean, with that, just make sure you tell them more time than what you think you're going to be hunting, and then no one's going to be getting in trouble there. But obviously sticking to when you say you're going to be away, and making sure that you're getting that family time too. We obviously want to spend as much time in the bush, but also making sure that those relationships are still going strong. And this was her final one that she threw in there, but buy your significant other a bunch of flowers before you go away to lessen the blow of your absence. So there you go, fellas, and ladies, I guess too. If you're out there hunting, buy your partner something. But buy them a little gesture just to say you will be missed while we're out in the bush going crazy, roaring, croaking, running up and down the mountains. But that little gesture does go a long way in your absence. So step or tip number 2 is all around access. So what we are concentrating on here is for those people that have access, awesome, congratulations, huge part. It could also be securing dates for, we've got state land or public land here in New South Wales, you can hunt. So don't leave it to the last minute. Make sure you're in contact to whoever you have to be and need to be to lock in those dates. There's no point. There's nothing worse calling a farmer, the 1st of April, being like, "Oh, hey, Jono, can I come out for a week next week and bring a whole tribe of people with me, and yeah, we're just gonna park up and set up a couple of caravans and whatever else, or tents and stuff, and on their plate, like." Try and have the lowest footprint and be the most organized that you can. So call the farmers now. I mean, there's no excuse. You're listening to this podcast. So start lining up dates. I've already spoken to all my places and locked in dates. Aiden and I and Dad are going to be heading across to a couple of places. So just trying to get that organized. And I mean, it is fluid. Like there may be a little bit in that we stay a day longer, but a lot of places nowadays too, especially if it's paid access or state forest or whatnot, there's obviously a lot of high competition for those prime dates. So getting in early and making sure that you've got time, because otherwise other camps are going to be booking in time for those prime dates. So if you can get in first, then first in, best dressed, and then it's going to give you the best opportunity to be successful during the rut. The other one around getting access is don't wait until March 20th or March, early April to be like, oh shit, I always wanted to hunt a red deer and fallow and I don't really have access. So now is going to be the time to door knocking. I guarantee you, like a lot of these really good places, they getting calls like during the rut every day for people to come and hunt on their place. So really now, like prioritize a weekend, go and stay in a motel for a night, spend a day door knocking. I've always found that networking through other people to be the best. Just talking to people that may live in an area, or even like people with trades or contractors or anything, to try and get access has been way more successful than door knocking. But I have got arguably some of my best properties now purely just from rocking up, introducing yourself and trying to sort of sweet talk the farmer, I guess, into letting you on their place. And because it is a big deal, letting a complete stranger just have complete access to, most of the time it's their livelihood in terms of stock and their property and whatnot. So yeah, just making sure that you're respectful. But yeah, trying to get access as early as possible and lock in dates is going to be key to your success. Power your passion with OzCaf Energy. OzCaf is designed to give you a caffeine hit when you need it most. Consisting of a 35 milligrams of caffeine, that's half the amount of a shot of coffee. It's convenient, discreet, and portable. They're your best friend for a rapid energy absorption and pick me up at any time of day. I've been using these specifically out in the field when I've been hunting before I go in for the final stalk, because I find that it just keeps me wide and makes sure I'm ultra focused when I move in. I've then started using it and implementing it in everyday life when I'm editing before I go to the gym, and I find that it just gives me enough energy to go and focus for an hour or so. It doesn't affect my sleep cycle, which is hugely important. With 0 sugar and 0 calories, what have you got to lose? We've teamed up with OzCaf to get you 10% off your next order at checkout by using the code TWINELEMENTS, that is TWINELEMENTS, to get 10% off your next order. So the next two topics I probably could combine, but we've separated them out for obvious reasons. And as a guide, these are probably the two main things where we find that people have let us down in the past with taking them on a guided hunt. And so the first one that we're going to discuss is fitness. So as you can imagine, fitness, especially because most of the reds and fallow I know, maybe except for the exclusion of sort of Western Australia and South Australia, most of the fallow and reds that I know are at least in some form of mountainous country, which makes it all that harder to chase raws and stalk up on croak and bucks. So making sure that you've got a base level of fitness, and this is the same thing. Like it's not waiting until that last minute to start going for a walk around the block. It does, like, obviously the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And I just find it's one of these things personally that, because deer are crepuscular, which means essentially they're most active at dawn, during the night and also at dusk, like those opportunities that you're going to get, generally speaking, are in the first hour and the last hour of light. And so fitness to know, like what I was saying earlier with that fallow stalk, fitness to know that there's no physical limitations, or less physical limitations, I guess, to sprint up that mountain for a roaring stag, is going to be the reason why you're going to be more successful. Whereas often I've found taking people hunting, the reason, like I've had roaring red stags 300 meters above me, and had people just pull out and say they can't even get there. And we've walked away from roaring deer. And same thing with fallow bucks, where we're in the last half an hour of light and there's a croaking buck up there, and it is a fair way up the mountain, but I've had people be like, no, I just don't think I'm going to be able to get there before light. So fitness is a huge one, especially when you're hunting the hills, like I said, and making sure that you've put in the work. I guess some, like, even just like I said earlier, like going for a walk with your partner, just really from mental health and physical health benefits, and probably relationship benefits is going to be a big thing. We've got daylight savings at the moment, beautiful time. We've got this warmer weather. You don't need to be sitting on the couch watching friends and neighbors. You can get out and go for a half an hour walk. If you want to take it to that next level, chuck a couple of weights in your backpack just to get you used to even carrying a 5 or 10 kilo weights. If you want to really take it to that next level, I'd probably suggest either walking the hills, either with or without weight, or just doing what I'm about to start doing and actually buy a Stairmaster that I'm going to chuck in my little man den that I've got here where I do my podcast and editing for you guys. Actually have my own personal Stairmaster so I can just make sure that I'm fit for the rut and all other occasions like the US, and whatever other sneaky little hunts I can fit in for this year and into the future. But in my opinion, there's nothing better than a Stairmaster weighted or walking around the mountains weighted to get fit. So that's going to be the ultimate test for how prepared you are in terms of fitness for this rut. But the key to all this stuff, guys, is start now. Don't wait until the end of March. And as discussed before, the second part of where Aiden and I felt that people have sort of let themselves down, and probably let us down a little bit, to be honest, is with tuning your bow or your rifle. I can't think of how many times we've had people on a hunt and you've got them, you put in all the work, you got them to this prime position. Yeah, they've just shot way out. They can't hold back their bow for long enough. They can't shoot, from a kneeling position. The excuses go on. At the end of the day, we are responsible for the accuracy of our equipment, and we're responsible for the welfare of the animals that we hunt. And so I don't think not having enough time is a good enough excuse, and not having your gear ready, including arrows and all the rest of it, razor sharp and ready to go, is just not good enough. Another thing that's a bit of a trick, people I find that hunt a lot tend to not be as well prepared because they find that just because they're hunting a lot. But from personal experience, you can go for a couple of weeks without even having a shot. Like, just going hunting really isn't good enough. And also, if you're like on a hunt, so during the rut specifically, like I said, Aiden and I, we've got a month planned. Like, some of that I'll be filming, some of that I'll be hunting. But making sure that you go back to camp, and it's really nothing. Like, it does wonders for your confidence and takes about 10 seconds of your time. But just putting a couple of shots down range, like literally just stepping it out 20, 30, 40, boom, 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 get them in the 10 rings, and then, touch up those broadheads, or if even just field tips is better than nothing. And because it just keeps your form. I find that a lot of people shoot leading up to the main event, but then especially like, you go to the US and hunt for 20 days straight, like what I did. Not last year, but the year before. Every day when we were in camp, if I could, I'd shoot. And even after dark, like, I just turn the car lights on and shoot. And that's just to make sure that, you don't know what's happened to your bow. Like, I've had it a couple of times where, your peep might twist or something like that. And like, you've drawn back before you even go into a stalk just to make sure, or before you've first landed somewhere just to make sure it's right. And you draw back and your peep's twisted. And it's like, well, if you'd drawn back and there was, a roaring red stag at 20 meters and you just busted your ass into that position, you draw back and your peep's twisted, well, you're going to be pretty pissed off. So it's just trying to eliminate all those errors, but just making sure that you've shot in a couple of positions as well. Like, make sure you're confident kneeling in that half squat position that everyone hates. And obviously, just shooting at a range of distances. I personally like to shoot way further than I, like to shoot. So this year, like, I'm actually setting up in my backyard because we've got a new block. Setting up out to 60 meters with like a reinforced wall and a couple of targets, just so that I can be absolutely dialed in and confident at that 20, 30, 40. And I find that, if you can dial yourself into 50, 60, getting all those little stabilizer muscles ready to go, and just primed so that, you're 100% on, and you're going to take out the top of that heart of whatever critter you face during this rut at those closer distances. Just adding on to that, and our tip 5 is getting your gear prepared and just having a bit of a list. So like I know I've got a running list in my phone every time I go out. If something's not quite right, I'll give you an example. I actually broke the belt buckle on my backpack a couple of weeks ago, just accidentally stood on it and it snapped. And just not waiting around to let that sort of, I don't know, be the detriment of your success. Like we obviously have the odds stacked so far against us. So just making sure all your gear's right all the time. A big one for you, which we've actually teamed up with Venture Hunting and Outdoors to sort of prepare a bit of a rut package, which they'll be running shortly. It's just to highlight gear that we think is really important for chasing those reds and fallow during the rut. So big ones for us are rattle bags, which, obviously for rattling in fallow bucks, especially pre-rut, is a really effective tactic or strategy. So having a rattle bag in our bags at all times is really important. Trial camera is another huge one for scouting and just assessing what bucks are in the area. Really good for also, looking at velvet bucks and watching velvet bucks as they grow out. Wind puffers, obviously in the mountains, like with thermals and predominant wind direction being so finicky, it's an absolute critical piece of equipment. Another one's game bags. So this year we've got the Agali ultralight game bags. Traditionally we've used pillowcases just because they were a really cheap option, but I guess they sort of reflected that in their quality. Like you'd often find little bits of sort of air and fluff and stuff on your meat, which is not ideal. Whereas these look really well designed, designed to hang game out in the field as well, which I think is going to make the world of difference for the quality of the meat in there, enable it to let all the fluid drip out of it, but also cool down really quickly, which was always a bit of a problem with using pillowcases because you pretty much always just chuck them straight into your backpack where they're sort of festering, I guess. The heat's not being able to get out of them, and then you're chucking them straight into a cooler, an esky or Yeti or fridge or whatever. Whereas with these, at least you can hang them, let them go through sort of the rigor process and cool down without that sort of rapid plunge. And I genuinely think it is going to make all the world of difference for eating quality of the meat. So really keen to give them a try. And last but not least, the camo that you're using, but just making sure that your camo is completely set out, including a really good rainproof jacket or at least weather resistant jacket. It was probably the biggest reasons why I find people get or become uncomfortable when you're taking them out hunting is if they get really wet, which obviously in April, you're starting to push into winter here. And so you can get those sort of cold mornings, but also wet conditions. And it's a reason why people head back to camp when, to be honest, I think after it stops raining or even sometimes during it's raining can be some of the best hunting. With obviously the rain bringing like moisture, and then bucks have to go and freshen up their scrapes. Additionally, it brings cooler conditions, which means generally speaking, the stags and bucks will rut harder. And so making sure that your equipment is good enough that you can be out there and capitalize on those circumstances. Making sure you've got some good rain gear or at least a good jacket to stay out in the field longer and hopefully get the opportunities you need. Cayuga broadheads designed by hunters for hunters. I cannot speak more highly of the Cayuga range. I absolutely love them. Since switching over, they have performed flawlessly for Aiden and I. Aiden currently shoots 150 grain Zots while I'm running the 150 grain Gen 2 pilot cuts with bleeders. No matter which head you choose from the range, we're 100% confident in their performance, and we know you guys are going to love them too. Make sure to grab some heads early so you know that you can start practicing with them, and make sure that you've got all your gear sorted for the rut. We've teamed up with Cayuga broadheads to get 10% off your next order at checkout, so use code TWIN10, that is code TWIN10 numerically, to get 10% off at checkout. Now, we decided to separate this next one out, tip 6, into its own topic because there's so much around it, and that is trial cameras. So trial cameras obviously a huge asset. Like we can't be in the field 24/7, whereas these guys can, and if they're used properly, they can be a wealth of knowledge and save a lot of boots on the ground for you guys and just let you know what bucks or stags are in the area. And I use trial cameras at different times of the year for different things. So Mainly during the summer period when bucks and stags are going through the velvet period, I would like to put them on sort of dams and water troughs, trying to get them on water and really concentrate them there. And then what I sort of tend to do with red stags during that sort of early March or late Feb period, I'll start transitioning them mainly to sort of game trails and high traffic areas where you might know that the hinds are moving through, even like bedding areas and stuff like that. Just trying to pick up stags as they move into the area. Similarly, in that sort of middle of Feb, I guess, time to early March, that's when I'm starting to set cameras up on scrapes or areas that I know there has been scrapes traditionally and the best scrapes that I know of. So generally there's going to be multiple scrapes, which we'll touch on with it for a buck. In fact, hundreds, but really they're only going to have one or two main scrapes. And so normally from history, you know what those main scrapes are because generally they're the one that the buck's croaking on first thing in the morning. If you don't have that history, generally speaking, if this is your first time on a place and you don't really have that history, you can actually go out and try and find these areas just for looking at old rub trees and stuff like that. Generally speaking, a buck wants to be sort of halfway to 2/3 of a way up on a little bench where he can sort of project out into a gully system like fallow deer all show. They're obviously trying to attract as many girls as possible. And so, yeah, you can sort of try and find these areas, but it will by now be quite hard to actually find the exact scrape, but they will be in very similar spots if you know from year to year where they have been. So setting them up on there, because what the bucks will start doing is the bucks are going to come back and start setting up their scrapes again. And they're obviously going to set their scrapes up to do with the doe schedule. So the bucks will move in high doe concentrate areas, whether that be feeding transition areas or bedding areas, and that's where they're going to set their scrapes up. And then obviously when we get to the breeding season, the does are going to go to the bucks actually to breed. But the reason why the scrapes are there are because of the does, not because of where the bucks wanted to put them. Another thing to be mindful of with trial cameras, especially as the bucks and stags get to the period now in late January, is I hear the phrase skunting a lot, which is like scouting/hunting. And just be mindful that, when you are checking your trial cameras, you are hunting. I mean, nothing to say that the biggest bull you've ever seen or a fox is going to pop up in the grass 20 meters from your trial camera. So, it's one thing just to punch up a hill and check a camera, but there is repercussions to that. You are educating animals, whether it be eyesight, being seen, or by smell. So just trying to check your cameras will have as low impact as possible. To be honest, I'd pretty much like to set them up and hunt my way to and from cameras. I'm never just walking in on a camera to quickly check it. Like, it's always the sort of calculated move. I'm going to go hunt this gully system and I'm going to go and check that camera. And that's just purely because I find that the more interactions you have with the animals, generally the hinds and the does, the more educated they become and the more pressure they feel and the harder they become to hunt. They start going into the thicker stuff. And generally speaking, especially as the rut goes on, the more pressure you put on them, the less vocal they become. So just keep that in mind when you're going to check your cameras, that you're not putting too much pressure on the environment as well. So after we've ticked off our first 6 tips, I guess that leads into actual scouting. So this is probably more, you've got the time off work, you've expressed, that you want to go away for a couple of weeks or a week or a weekend to your friends and family, organise that with the property owner. You put in the time, you've done, been walking around the block, gone for a run, jumped on the Stairmaster, even for 20 minutes at the gym. You've been shooting your bow or your rifle, everything's sighted in, you've got your gear ready, you've got your rattle bags, you've put some trial cameras out, you've been checking them. Now is really to do with scouting for the rut, and we're going to have some stuff for reds and fallow specifically, like I said, in future podcasts. But yeah, just wanted to touch on a few topics here around finding the does and finding the scrapes, so you can sort of plan a bit of a rut tactic going forward and have a bit of a plan in your head before the rut even rocks up. So as most seasoned hunters will be aware, the rut happens in a very similar spot every year, whether it be red stags or fallow bucks. Generally speaking, with reds, the hinds are going to be in a certain area. That does probably vary more than fallow, and it's mainly to do with pressure, but also definitely feed. So if you've got cattle in a certain paddock and that's well and truly chewed down, then they're less likely to be there, even though they've been there in years previous. Obviously, other factors like water coming out of late summer depending if we have like quite a dry autumn, if dams and troughs have been shut off or dried out, then that's obviously going to limit access to paddocks and whatnot, and mountain ranges particularly for them. But yeah, definitely with a fallow, like I said before, predicting where they're going to be rutting. Well, I mean, if you had a mega scrape somewhere last year, it's most likely going to be in a very similar spot. And the reason why that's there is because that's probably the highest traffic of where the does are, and it's a good area for the buck to project his croaking. So we like to scout areas, and like I said, because it does change year to year, we like to go out and essentially go hunting really just before the rut, and just find where those does are. So like obviously a big one, like I said, feed and water. If you had a really crappy season, which some farmers in the area would have had this year with particular dry conditions, and there's limited feed, well, some places that I'd be checking, even though it's not the first place on my list in terms of where it was the highest dose last year, but it might be a paddock that's locked up, that looks really good, but you've just never really seen that many deer in there. And yeah, I've always found that if you go and check the places where the cattle aren't, you normally have really good success in terms of finding good deer numbers, or pig numbers for that matter too. Other areas, finding really good bedding areas. So depending on the time of the year, which slope does want to be, or where in a mountainous landscape does want to be bedded, and same with hinds. So obviously if it's a crappy day, they might want to be bedded on the northeast or east facing slope so they can warm up. Equally though, if it's a really hot day, they might want to be bedded on the west facing slopes where they're not so much in the sun, and generally thicker, cooler conditions down in the gullies there. So just taking that all into account, also taking into account where the does or hinds are feeding, and then obviously that transition area back to a bedding area. So those are sort of the three categories I like to think of it in terms of scouting. So it's feeding, bedding, transition, and just trying to find those corridors that the does or hinds are traveling on, because generally speaking, that is going to be the next thing where, especially for fallow deer, that's where they're going to be setting up their scrapes. So they're going to be setting up their scrape lines, like I said, mainly in those three categories, with a main one being in their feeding area for sort of first light, last light, but also mainly in their bedding area as well, where they'll go back to in the middle of the day. And that's where, in the peak of the rut, he might be croaking from as well. So try and find those scrapes. And if you can find the does, well, the bucks go to the does, and that's where they're going to set up their scrapes, like I said. And then once the rut kicks on, the does will go to the bucks to become bred. So if you haven't had that much experience, obviously a scrape is just a shallow little divot that the bucks sort of dig out. So you might find hundreds across your property in a really good area, and they're generally speaking going to be like a foot wide by a foot long sort of thing, just like tiny little things. They're normally, there's a tree over the top of them, and they scent mark with their glands. But you really want to find their sort of bigger ones, where we're talking about 1 meter to 1 meter. I mean, it can be exponentially bigger than that. Sometimes they can be 3 meters by 3 meters. And if you find something like that, you know that you're in an area with high traffic. There's a lot of bucks probably working it, and there's probably a really good buck that's sort of holding it as the mature one. So definitely something to put a camera on, but definitely something to potentially rattle off, sit and wait off, depending how active the rut is going for you in terms of vocalization and chasing bucks. Sitting off some of these mega scrapes definitely pays dividends when it's quiet, but we'll get into those tips and tactics in another podcast. Something else I like to do with this scouting time, especially sort of leading up into the rut, that late Feb, early March period, is learning the environment of where the scrapes are. So obviously if you know where these mega scrapes are and can anticipate that, and same with even with the red deer, where the hinds are, where the wallows were last year, and the main mountain just say they lived on. Well, it's really important to start learning and almost like planning the stalk before it, start orchestrating the hunt before it even happens. So, especially people that have hunted on there for, a place for 20 years, well, you can almost guarantee you where you're probably going to shoot your buck, or where the most rutting activity, or where the leck's going to be. Equally, same with red deer, you hunt all these mountains, but you can probably pick out the gully system that it's most likely going to go down in. And so next time you're in there and you're probably checking a camera or something like that, take into account like the best corridors for you in terms of game trails to get in and out. What's going to be the lowest impact area to get that 3/4 of the way up a mountain so that you can have, really good quiet walking, but have really good visibility. And equally speaking, something that I always like to do and take into account is finding the time that the thermals start to switch. So obviously that's going to differ whether you're on the east facing slope or a west facing slope of the main ridge, but also even like the finger ridges. And start planning your stalk out. So, if you've got a buck that's on an east facing slope at first light and it's going to get a heap of sun straight away, and the sun's going to be starting to come up and he's going to be croaking his guts out, well, you might be better off waiting 20 minutes or half an hour and coming in on top of him than trying to get in really quickly and have the thermals changing and shifting while you're on a stalk. Obviously the alternate on a west facing slope, and just start thinking about that for early morning and arvo hunts. As we've said, that's when that's game time, when you're most likely going to have these opportunities and stalks. And so start trying to sort of do research even on the field of play that you're almost going to go to battle with these stags and these hinds and bucks and does before the main event being the rut. And so the more knowledge that you guys have, the better prepared you can be for when the main event is. Hopefully it just helps add those little 1% in your favor and you can be successful during the rut. The last little tactic for scouting, and we sort of touched on it with e-scouting and stuff like that, but I actually like to mark in the exact location of my my scrapes and wallows, especially as well with reds and stuff like that, because I can't think of how many times you are trying to get somewhere in the dark, and especially if, generally speaking, it's like at the head of a gully on a Y is this buck crouching, and you are trying to sort of navigate there in the dark. And yes, they're obviously making noise, but if they shut up, it sort of leaves you in a bit of a position where you're trying to like pinpoint their location and like figure out exactly where the scrape is. But it just makes it a lot easier if you've got it pinned already in your phone, especially if you've got a camera on it. It makes it easier finding the camera too, but also just makes it easier for when you look at your map and you're trying to navigate into it potentially in the dark, or it just makes it so much easier from a stalking point of view to know exactly where that scrape is, because then obviously you know exactly where that buck most likely is, or exactly where that red most likely is roaring from if he's on a wallow, or if, same thing if he's on like a really good bedding area. So just trying to use all the advantages in technology that we have available to us to, increase the odds again. Start your day right with a great tasting brew from Dog & Gun Coffee. Whether it's beans for your coffee machine at home or their iconic preloaded drip filters, Dog & Gun have you covered. My favourite flavour is the Samba blend and allows me to have cafe-grade coffee whilst at home and out in the field. We've teamed up with Dog & Gun to get $10 off your next order by using code TWIN10, that is TWIN 10, the number, to get $10 off your next order. Go and check them out. Well, that wraps up the pre-rut preparation checklist for you guys. Hope you found that beneficial. So hopefully we can help you guys be planned for your next rut and increase the odds of your success. The biggest thing, obviously, is making sure that you're implementing those as soon as possible. It's one thing just to listen to this podcast and be like, oh, that was great. There's a lot of insight into that. But it's another thing to actually go out and implement all those strategies and tips and tricks that we've shared with you guys. So make sure, in summary again, that you are locking in time with work to make sure that you firstly can get out into the mountains, making sure it's okay with your friends and family to be taking off that time, and no one's going to hold any grudges against you within your family, and making sure that you've handled all your responsibilities before you hit the hills. The next one is then locking up access with whether it be your property owner, or making sure, especially if you're getting access for the first time, going out now rather than leaving it last minute for the rut to try and get access. Additionally, if you're booking in a state forest or something like that, making sure that you're trying to get prime dates. I imagine already a lot of them are already booked out. I've never hunted in that model or system, but I imagine the prime weeks are booked out well in advance. Putting in a little bit of effort in terms of fitness, depending on how diehard you are and how successful you want to be. I find a lot of the time, like these next two topics being how well you can shoot and you tune your bow and how ready all your gear are, as well as how fit you are, really can predict the outcome of your hunt. Putting in some work, and it doesn't take a lot now to go a long way. A little bit of consistency, like I said, walking the block with your partner, all the way up to doing the Stairmaster or doing some extra hunts really does pay dividends. So making sure you're getting prepared there. Trial cameras and learning your block, huge asset when it comes time for the rut. You've done your research, you know everything you know or can know about where you're going to be hunting and the animals you're going to be hunting. So hopefully it just, especially if you're going to be targeting a big buck or a big stag, it just increases your odds. You've done done as much research planning as you possibly can, and that hopefully will see you guys be successful during the rut. But now we're just going to jump into some FAQs. Thank you for sending these ones in. Once again, if you have any questions on getting rut ready or just in general with the podcast, you can email them to info@twinelements.com.au and please use the subject line FAQ. Alternatively, feel free to send us a message on Twin Elements, Aiden Doumtsis Outdoors or James Doumtsis Outdoors, and we will get those questions answered in future podcasts. So the first question this week is, do you prefer to doe call or rattle off scrapes? So it depends on what time or what setting. So if it's, generally speaking, if I want to be as low impact as possible, and if bucks aren't really making a lot of noise, I'll actually prefer to doe call, and hopefully just have, especially if it's like a nice tight little gully, thinking that a buck's bedded up in there or sitting on another scrape close by or coming through and checking scrapes. Then generally speaking, I like to doe call to try and sort of catch the eager ear of a buck moving through. It's obviously a lot less, probably more passive and less abrupt than rattling, and doing so obviously you don't reach as many ears, but it's also sort of less threatening, I guess, in some ways. And yeah, find it probably low risk and probably low reward in that sense, to how successful I am or have been, doing doe calls, but certainly do them cold calling a lot. And if it's quiet, I'll definitely sit there for 15-20 minutes, do some doe calling and try and catch a buck's ears and get them to come in. Obviously, always be ready if you're sitting off a scrape. Have an arrow on the string, and if you're within proximity of the scrape, make sure that you can actually. The first thing they're going to do, whether you're rattling or doe calling, is go straight to the scrape because that's where they think the action is. That's what they're going to be checking. So make sure you've got shooting lane to that, and make sure you've definitely got an arrow on the string and you're not just sitting on your ass. Make sure you can actually shoot. In terms of rattling, I love rattling. I think it's really successful, especially pre-rut, when the bucks are all going around checking their scrapes before the girls have actually started going to become or get bred in the scrapes. So pre-rut I definitely find as a really effective time, where on some good blocks, you can do it and rattle in multiple bucks to each scrape. A big killer, I guess, that I find some people do, and you have to be cautious of. Every year I try and spend a large amount of time in the bush, and very rarely do I hear bucks fighting. Like I've had places that are good enough, with high doe numbers and buck numbers to have leks, sort of like in Europe where you might have 50 or 60 animals all fighting and croaking. That's bucks and does on one place. There might be 15 or 20 bucks all in this sort of fighting arena, and there might be 20 or 30 does there that come there. And it's absolute mayhem. But even in places like that, you're not hearing crash and bang and fighting bucks all the time. Like it's not like there's a fighting buck fighting bucks, I should say, hiding under every rock. So just take that into account because obviously, like everything you do, you are educating these animals. So that obviously comes back to making sure you're set up as best as you can, because every failed stalk opportunity, I guess, is an education session for that doe that saw you and that buck that winded you or saw you or you missed or whatever. So just making sure that you're always as prepared as possible and give yourself the best chance to be successful. But equally speaking, when you're rattling and stuff, like I try not to, I guess, over rattle, in the sense that I know some people that will just go out and just rattle, walk 150 meters, rattle, walk 150 meters, rattle, and they just do that for days on end. I guess to the point that, you generally rattle and they pretty much run the other direction. So I'll tend to only do it maybe once or twice a day, sort of once in the morning, once in the arvo, and mainly when it's sort of like, and same thing, like generally speaking, you don't see bucks fighting at 2:00 in the afternoon. Like it's mainly sort of early morning, late arvo. So try and replicate when you'd think you'd naturally hear a buck and where you'd naturally hear a buck fighting. so set up off a main scrape, do some rattling, make sure you set up. And yeah, I find it as a really, really successful tactic. Like they're coming in to you, which is always great. Like you bringing something, or you attracting something to you is always a lot easier than you stalking it. And making sure you can be, as planned. It's funny, like you've got every opportunity to be set up as best as you can. And I always find that people just, I don't know, it's almost like they don't expect something to come in. And so they like half-ass it. And then they're like surprised when this massive buck or, roar, you roar in a red or you're roaring for reds and then all of a sudden one comes in quiet and you're like surprised and you don't have an arrow on the string. You're like, oh shit. It's like, well, that's the opportunity you've been waiting for all right, mate. You blew it. So just making sure that you're planned and prepared whenever you are doing any calling is really critical. But both doe calls and rattles can be really effective off scrapes. I personally probably rather rattle, higher risk, higher reward, and just find it probably penetrates out into the atmosphere a bit more and gets more animals gets more animal to hear it. So hence you get a bigger response. So I'd say rattling for me. So our next listener question is, will you sit at a scrape all day or do you prefer to be moving / looking for bucks during the rut? So I'm fairly active and I, to be honest, would rather be walking from like thinking that they're going to be walking, just say first thing in the morning from the feeding area through the transition corridors and to the bedding area. So I would rather walk, I guess, on those game trails that have the scrapes and stuff and follow those rut lines of rubs and whatnot. But if I find a fresh scrape, one that potentially has piss in it, where in the back of my mind I'm probably thinking, did I walk too quickly onto this and did I scare a buck off it? Or that's where game cameras on really good scrapes can be handy because you can educate yourself on how many times you've scared a buck that was bedded on the scrape off it. I found that out before, which is super handy tactic just for, learning how to sort of move and weave through the bush. But I, definitely will sit off a scrape. I won't do it all day. I don't find it very successful. I've certainly done it before. And like I said, even in like high traffic areas, I've found it pretty, I don't know, like not really worthwhile. I'd rather, rather rattle or doe call off one. If it's in a really high traffic area, I find sort of, to be honest, not first thing in the morning, but maybe that if it's getting light at, 5:30, 6 o'clock when the rut rolls around, I find it more beneficial to be doing it at sort of that 8:30 to maybe 10 o'clock because, it's pretty low input. You can just be sitting there ready. But you can also hear other animals and like it's a bit of an easy one. Instead of going back to camp, you can just be sitting there glassing the opposite face, ready on a main scrape. If something walks in, you've obviously got an opportunity. That's like probably the time that I'd be doing sporadic doe calls just to see if anything I can catch anything's ear and bring them into my location. But I don't really sit on scrapes all day. If I was targeting a particular buck, I guess, and there was only really one buck I wanted to get, then maybe I'd look at sort of a tree stand setup or sitting in probably not a blind, but maybe a tree stand or sitting on something all day. But I do like that running around sort of, and even just like slowly moving, picking apart the country and turning up opportunities and deer like that rather than just sitting on a scrape all day. So hope that answered those questions. Thank you for you guys sending them in. Just wrapping up the podcast now. Aiden and I are running our 10K follower giveaway. As soon as the Twin Elements account gets to 10K followers, we're going to be giving away a $300 voucher for venture hunting and outdoors. So thank you for them for supporting the podcast. And that $300 is going to be drawn perfectly timed for you guys to get some of that gear that we've spoken about pre-rut. So the details are in a post on our Instagram page. It's been pinned to our Twin Elements, Aiden Doumtsis Outdoors and James Doumtsis Outdoors. It's the first post in all of our things. So jump on there, the details to enter in there, and make sure you get in that, and hopefully you can be lucky and be the one that wins the $300 voucher. The next thing on the agenda is on the 12th of February, we're releasing the first episode of our feature film that we're doing called Fallow Frenzy. It's a hunt that we filmed a couple of ruts ago with our good mate Nick Morton in the hills of New South Wales, where he searches for a truly giant buck that we affectionately called Uno, which you'll see why in the film. We've broken that one down into 5 parts, and yeah, some of the fallow rutting activity in that are awesome. Really good takeaways in terms of tactics and stuff like that. Sort of set up that hopefully you guys can, just analyze it yourselves and take a few home truths about hunting fallow and learn some stuff from our mistakes, I guess. But yeah, it's an action-packed film. Couple of fallow get shot, Andy Bohr. So you guys are going to love that one. And like I said, that's a 5-part series starting on the 12th of Feb. So make sure to jump on the Twin Elements YouTube channel to check that one out. So another thing to mark into the calendar is Aiden and I will be at Venture Hunting and Outdoors Springwood store in Brizzy on Friday the 14th and Saturday the 15th of Feb to discuss all things fallow deer and red deer for the rut. So we've split that up into 2 parts. So the Friday night, we're going to have a bit of a film launch. We're going to combine the 5-part series for Fallow Frenzy into a 1-part full film, feature film for you guys. So come down, watch that. It's a free thing. Just come in, watch it, and we'll do a bit of a Q&A afterwards. Aiden and I are going to be in the store all day. So if you just want to come in, talk gear, chew our ear off, get some tips and tactics, pester us to get our films out sooner, whatever you guys want to do, we're going to be there. Get our advice on gear, what we'll be running for the rut going forwards. So yeah, we are at your disposal. Come in, say hey, and it'll be awesome to catch up and put a face to a name of you legends. So make sure you're there Feb 14th and 15th at the Venture Hunting Outdoors Springwood store. Another one for the calendar is on the 1st of March. We will be doing the Flow State Outdoors Expo. This is a new expo that's just started up, but it's attracting a lot of attention and getting a lot of cool names in the outdoor world there. So that's going to be held at the Wodonga Racecourse and Exhibition Centre at the Vic, New South Wales border. So come down for the day and have a look around. There's going to be some really cool stores. Yeti is going to be a big name there. They're going to be hosting a VIP wild dining experience between 5 and 7 o'clock. So it's $100 for a ticket, but there's only also 100 available. So I know that I've already grabbed a couple of tickets for friends and family. I imagine by the time this podcast rolls out, well and truly be on its way to being sold out. So they're going to be doing wild food cooking. There's a couple of big name chefs there, and it's going to be absolutely awesome. So make sure there's only 100 tickets. Like I said, by the time you're hearing this, it's probably nearly sold out. So make sure you go and grab a ticket to that. The early bird special for tickets for entry just at the gate. So that's currently running as well. And we've teamed up with Flow State to give away a hunt at Spotted Safaris valued at $6,000 to the winner of one of the early bird tickets. So if you're even thinking about going to the expo, you're pretty much better off just buying a ticket to be in the raffle, even if you don't go, just in the way that you might win a hunt with us at Spotted Safaris. Valued at $6,000 for a Chiddle Stag. It's an awesome hunt, obviously taken plenty of people, and everyone loves coming out with us for a hunt. So make sure that you get your tickets to be in the draw. Like I said, it's only for the early bird tickets. It's not for if you rock up on the day and just buy one, but it's going to be a really cool expo. Like I said, some big name people are going to be there. Aiden and I are going to be there. We'll be teaming up with Adam Greentree and Nick Morton and Wade, doing a bit of a Q&A and sort of live stream in the afternoon. But Aiden and I will also have a booth, so we'll be set up and you guys can come down and have a chat with us there. So make sure to get your early bird tickets to be in the chance to win a hunt, but also make sure to rock up, because I can guarantee it's going to be an awesome day. So get around it and support this new expo, because we want to make the hunting industry boom, and this is just another event that we can get around every year. So make sure you guys support it. Last but not least, we are nearing 20k subscribers on our YouTube. So thank you guys for all the support. We really do appreciate it. And because of that, this year, Aiden and I are really focused on doing a lot of giveaways. So we're teaming up with the people that support us and hopefully the people that you support as well because of that. And we've teamed up on this one with Lower, and they're going to be giving away a free pair of Ranger GTX 3 boots. So we're going to just keep an eye out for that. We'll be dropping the details to the giveaway in the next couple of podcasts, so make sure you're listening in the future. But we might speak to a couple of other ambassador companies and get a few more items in there just to bulk up that package. But at this stage, Loa's chucking the winner of that giveaway a free pair of Ranger GTX3 boots, which they're the pairs that Aiden and I have been running for 5 years now. Absolute dynamite in the mountains, but we also wear them whether we're hunting chital deer or hunting boars or buff, all the way to New Zealand, elk, and everything in between. So if you want a one-stop shop pair of boots, I can guarantee you are going to love the Ranger GTX3s. But yeah, thank you again, Loa, for giving them to us to do a giveaway with. And yeah, make sure you jump on and start following and subscribe to the YouTube channel, be in the chance to win. But for more details, catch up with us in future podcasts. And that wraps up this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Please don't send me too many heartbreaking messages about the velvet buck from this morning. Hopefully I can find another one. But to you all out there, thank you very much for your support through this podcast. Hopefully you can take something away. And like I said, the biggest thing is just making sure that you're putting this as a bit of a checklist and starting to get everything in line for the rut. Don't leave it to last minute to, lock in the week, get your access sorted, and make sure your gear's sorted. So get that all organized now. If you guys can please like and subscribe to the podcast, give it a 5-star review. It just helps spread it amongst the wider community. The more followers and feedback that we get through the podcast, it obviously inspires us to keep growing and getting bigger, and enables us to do more of this for you guys. So it's just keeping that wheels turning. So yeah, please remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, and also rate the podcast with 5 stars. We really appreciate it. Once again, thank you very much, guys, and we will talk to you next week for another episode of the Twin Elements podcast.